The moment those blue and red lights flash in your rearview mirror, something changes in your body. Your grip tightens on the steering wheel. Your heart rate jumps. You start running through every possible mistake you might have made in the last 5 minutes. Was I speeding? Did I miss a sign? Is my registration expired? And then comes the quiet dread as you pull over and sit there, waiting. What actually went through your mind the last time a police officer walked up to your window? I want you to think about that for a second, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments, because most people don't realize just how much that moment matters until it's already too late. And I'm going to explain something in a minute that most drivers completely misunderstand about these interactions, something that could quietly change the entire outcome of a traffic stop. Now here's the part that might surprise you. Most traffic stops are not really about the traffic violation. That sounds strange, but it's true. From the officer's perspective, the stop is often an investigation. The broken taillight, the rolling stop, the slightly drifting lane position, those are often just the legal reason to initiate contact. What happens after that is where things start to matter. And this is where the so-called police tricks come in. I don't mean anything illegal or shady. I mean techniques, psychological strategies, patterns of questioning and observation that are designed to get you talking, to get you comfortable, and sometimes to get you to say something you didn't plan on saying. And here's the uncomfortable truth. These techniques work on almost everyone. Not because people are stupid, but because they're human. You're sitting there with your window down. The officer walks up, calm but alert, maybe one hand resting near their belt. They greet you casually. "Hey, how's it going tonight?" That sounds like small talk. It feels like politeness. But it's not just that. That's your first test. Because the moment you respond, the officer is already evaluating you. Your tone, your eye contact, whether your voice shakes, whether you seem overly eager or strangely quiet. Even something as simple as how quickly you answer can start forming a picture in their mind. And here's where most drivers make their first mistake. They treat the stop like a normal conversation. They start explaining, justifying, talking more than they need to. "Yeah, officer, I'm good, just heading home. I know I might have been going a little fast, I'm just tired from work." You think you're being cooperative. You think you're helping your situation. But what you're actually doing is giving away control of the interaction. Because once you start talking, it's very hard to stop. Officers are trained to keep that momentum going. They'll ask follow-up questions, sometimes the same question in slightly different ways. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? What do you do for work? None of these questions are random. They're looking for consistency. They're looking for hesitation. They're looking for anything that doesn't quite line up. And here's something people rarely think about. Even truthful answers can create problems if they're unclear or inconsistent under pressure. You might say, "I'm coming from a friend's place." Later, when asked again, you say, "I was just out with some friends." Those two answers are not contradictory in your mind. But to an officer who is trained to notice detail, that shift might raise a question. Why did the story change slightly? And once suspicion starts building, even a little bit, the tone of the stop can change. This is where another common trick comes into play. Silence filled with pressure. The officer might pause after you answer, just a little longer than normal. They might look at you without saying anything, maybe glance inside your car, then back at you. That silence is not accidental. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. They feel the need to fill it, so they start talking again. I mean, not like a party or anything, just a small get-together, nothing crazy. Now you've added more detail that wasn't asked for. And every extra detail is another piece of information that can be analyzed, questioned, or misunderstood. This is why the phrase you say matters more than most people realize. But before we get to that, there's something else you need to understand about how officers think during these stops. Their job is built around risk. They don't know who you are. They don't know your intentions. Every stop has potential danger from their perspective. So they're watching everything. Your hands, your movements, whether you reach suddenly for something, whether you look back toward the passenger seat too often, whether your breathing seems off. And here's where people unintentionally escalate situations. They start moving around too much, reaching into the glove box quickly, digging through bags, turning their body repeatedly. Even if your intention is completely innocent, like finding your registration, those movements can raise concern. Now the officer is more alert, maybe more cautious, maybe more suspicious. And once that shift happens, the interaction becomes less relaxed and more controlled. Let's talk about another moment that catches people off guard. When the officer takes your license and registration and walks back to their patrol car. Most people think that's just routine processing. And yes, part of it is. But it's also a pause in the interaction that serves multiple purposes. It gives the officer time to run your information, check for warrants, verify your license status. But it also gives them time to think, to review what you said, to decide how they want to proceed. And sometimes, when they come back, the tone is different. Maybe a little more direct. Maybe more questions. Have you had anything to drink tonight? Now here's where people often make a critical mistake. They answer too quickly. No, nothing at all. But the officer might already suspect otherwise. Maybe it's your driving pattern. Maybe it's a faint odor. Maybe it's just a feeling based on experience. So they ask again. Not even one drink? That repetition is intentional. They're testing consistency. They're applying subtle pressure. And many people start adjusting their answer. Well, I had like one beer earlier, but that was hours ago. Now your answer has changed. Even if the truth is harmless, the inconsistency can be used to justify further investigation. This is how small conversations turn into bigger situations. Now let's talk about the moment when an officer asks you to step out of the vehicle. This is completely legal in most situations, and it often makes people nervous. They start wondering, am I in trouble? Did I do something wrong? And that nervousness shows. Your body language changes, your voice changes, and again, the officer is watching all of it. Once you're outside the vehicle, the dynamic shifts even more. You're more exposed, less comfortable, more likely to feel pressure. And that's when more questions come. Do you have anything illegal in the car? Mind if I take a look inside? This is one of the most important moments in the entire interaction, because this is where many people unknowingly give away their rights. They say yes, not because they want to, but because they feel like they have to. Or they think saying no will make them look guilty, or they just want the situation to end quickly. But here's the reality. Consent changes everything. If you say yes, you've just allowed a search that might not have happened otherwise. And if something is found, even something you forgot was there, that decision can have real consequences. Now this brings us to the phrase that most people never use but absolutely should understand. I choose to remain silent. Or more practically, in a traffic stop setting, something like, I'm not answering any questions. Or even more calmly, I prefer not to answer questions. That might feel uncomfortable to say. It might feel awkward. But it's one of the few ways to regain control of the interaction. And here's the key detail that people miss. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. If you say it with attitude, with hostility, with defiance, you're escalating the situation. But if you say it calmly, respectfully, without aggression, it sends a very different message. You're not being difficult, you're being careful. And that matters, because officers are also human. They respond to tone and behavior just like anyone else. Now here's something else that often happens. Even after you say you don't want to answer questions, the officer might keep asking. Not aggressively, just casually, trying different angles. Where are you headed tonight? Just trying to understand what's going on. This is another technique, because many people will break their own silence after a few more questions. They feel pressure, they feel awkward, they want to cooperate, and they start talking again. This is why consistency matters. If you choose not to answer questions, you have to stick with that decision. Otherwise, the protection you thought you had disappears. Now let's talk about passengers for a moment, because this is another area where things can go sideways. Passengers often think they're not part of the stop, but they are. Officers may ask them questions too, and passengers sometimes talk more freely than the driver. They might contradict something the driver said without even realizing it, or they might volunteer information that creates new suspicion. This is why communication inside the vehicle before anything happens matters more than people think. Because once the stop begins, You don't control what others say, and that can affect you. Another subtle tactic you might notice is the change in tone. An officer might start very friendly, almost conversational, then shift to more direct questioning, then back to friendly again. That shift is not random. It's a way of testing your reactions, seeing how you respond under different levels of pressure. Do you become defensive? Do you become overly talkative? Do you contradict yourself? Every reaction gives them more information. Now here's something that might make you rethink everything we've talked about so far. Most people believe that being completely open and cooperative will automatically lead to a better outcome. And sometimes it does, but not always. Because cooperation without boundaries can turn into self-incrimination, and silence without awareness can turn into suspicion. The balance is what matters. Knowing when to speak, knowing when not to, knowing how to say things clearly, calmly, and consistently, and understanding that every moment of that interaction is being observed and interpreted. Even something as small as how long you take to answer a question can matter. Even something as subtle as your breathing pattern can be noticed. That's the level of detail we're talking about. Now think back to that original moment, the lights in your mirror, the decision to pull over, the officer walking up to your window. Everything that follows from that point is shaped by how you handle those first few minutes. Not just what you say, but how you carry yourself. And here's the part that most people don't realize until it's too late. You don't rise to the occasion in these moments. You fall back on your habits. If your habit is to over-explain, you'll over-explain. If your habit is to get nervous and talk too much, that's what will happen. If your habit is to stay calm and measured, that's what will show. So the real question is not just what should you do during a traffic stop. It's what kind of behavior have you trained yourself to default to under pressure? Because when that officer is standing at your window, listening to your answers, watching your hands, evaluating your tone, you don't get time to think everything through from scratch. You react. And those reactions can shape everything that comes next. The stop might end in a simple warning, or it might turn into something much more serious. Sometimes based on nothing more than a few words spoken too quickly, or a moment of unnecessary explanation, or a decision to answer a question that didn't actually require an answer. That's why understanding these interactions matters. Not from a place of fear, but from a place of awareness. Because once you see how these patterns work, you start to recognize them in real time. You notice the repeated questions. You notice the silence. You notice the shifts in tone. And instead of reacting automatically, you start responding intentionally. And that changes everything. Not dramatically, not in a way that makes the situation confrontational, but in a quiet, controlled way that keeps you grounded. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to win the interaction. It's to get through it safely, calmly, and without creating unnecessary risk for yourself. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is very simple. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. That's the part people don't expect. And once you understand it, you start seeing these situations very differently the next time those lights appear behind you.